Yeah, so just starting off a little bit from my background here, and I presented 2 years ago with a couple of my collaborators in Village Lab, which is one of the whole system design collaboratives that I'm part of, um, villagelab.net, and we've worked on the model of the participatory commons, which is in itself an approach to creating a more in some ways, this is a restoring of, and if you want to make me the co-host actually, or the host, I can just mute folks if they get unmuted. Yeah, great. There will be time for people to share, but thanks a lot. So, yeah, through Village Lab, we worked on the participatory commons, which is a way of addressing regenerative economics, regenerative community engagement, and yes. So I wanted to start off, I'm not sure, with all the videos off, it's a little harder to tell who's all here, but you know, I want it to be pretty interactive, so I'm gonna just get a sense of who's here that we'll be able to engage if we do breakouts. We have a sense of, all right, thanks for tuning in. I see a couple more faces. All right, great. So yeah, just kind of starting with, let's just do a quick round of saying where you're from, and yeah, just to get, let me see who else I have here that I've already heard. We heard from Gabby and Alex. Rodrigo, would you like to just chime in, share where you're coming in from for a moment?
Hello, I'm Portugal. I am Portuguese. Yes, I'm from Portugal.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and let's see, we got Guy Union. George, you want to chime in?
Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm Georg. I am based in Germany since 25 years, but originally born in Austria. Yes. Anything else you're interested in?
Just that to start. But yeah, I know there's a lot more to share. And Thomas, quick hello. Well, it's good to get some voices in. I know that not everyone's necessarily going to be able to mic up, but that's where we might, because we have a small enough group, we might do some of the exercise in one room anyway, especially if some folks aren't here. That's what I was kind of trying to check to see if people are double tasking. One thing about these summits is that you know, it can be like 3 places to be at once. But yeah, honored to be part of Rebuild again. And you know, in the context of Regen Leadership, one of the places that I wanted to share is also the pro-social lens, and how pro-social and sociocracy are related to, and specifically to how they can be a resource for us in using them as a lens for regenerative leadership. So I will do a screen share. I just want to make sure that I have the ability to do that. And I just want to go ahead and make sure that's working. Are you seeing the core design principles and sociocracy? Yeah, great. So the work of Eleanor Ostrom around commons resource management heavily informed the work of pro-social. So Lynn Ostrom had studied Indigenous communities and their successful management of shared pool resources, and she discovered these patterns were essential patterns in their success. So the way that we bring these in as a design process is actually not so much like a top-down system, but more as a way to understand and watch for the patterns of this type of success. And so I'll speak through them somewhat briefly, and then the exercise, you can already start to think about them. If you want to be reading over them, you can think about which ones that might be the most important leverage point or challenges that you're working with in your community or your project, or in your endeavors. feel free to raise hands as well if people have questions, but we will definitely get a chance to unpack a little bit. This particular slide speaks to the way that prosocial and sociocracy are complementary. But the first piece, and these aren't necessarily sequential in order, but there's a very, very important need to have a shared identity and purpose for a group, for any size of group or any commons area. And the domain of that shared identity may be actually a smaller group, like a subgroup, where there's that clarity. But similar to having a really clear purpose or mission together, in a family, it's just the shared identity and coherence of our family, right, and the purpose there. But by defining or having that clear sense, that's where the part of that glue of commitment comes in. That's where we come back to, what is that shared identity and purpose and meaning. The second one, which actually is one of the ones that when we look at the current systems, or we look at more earlier indigenous systems, or we look at the regenerative economy that we're building now and that we're wanting to see more now, we want to see this flow of contribution and benefit, where when people are giving to the system, they receive naturally, they receive back for what they're giving. And within a system where that flows equitably, meaning that people are not extracted from, or they're not taken advantage of, but they actually are seen for their contributions. And when we see a system that would actually allow for people to have, like we were talking about earlier, the offers and needs or ways to express their value in more dynamic ways, that's the type of liberation that we want to see there too. So collective liberation is kind of one of the shared identity and purpose of the work that Shala, Massey, and I are doing together. As I mentioned, Shala's not able to present here today, but collective liberation is part of the shared identity and purpose that we're working with in terms of regenerative leadership. And so this piece around equitable distribution, we see innovations in this happening with different types of regenerative economics, and that's what we want to be able to see more. So going to number 3, the fair and inclusive decision making. As noted here, I mean, that's essentially the core of sociocracy. That's how it functions. Its purpose is to establish participatory and inclusive decision making, and in particular at the domain where people are engaged. And so this is one of the ways that there's an ability to scale sociocracy in a more complex system, where you can have people making decisions at different domains. You're not trying to have everybody make every decision. Yet at the level that you're engaged, you should have input. If it's influencing you, you want to be able to have input, and that's the essence of fair and inclusive decision making. So the number 4, the core design pattern number 4, monitoring of agreed behaviors. This is essentially in a very small community, like a village scale space, people can all see how each other are behaving. So thinking of like a shared kitchen, if you know who didn't wash the dishes and they're piling up in the sink, you can know who did that, and then you can ask them, or you can have that transparency. But when we get into complex expressions of society, and how can we see whose impact? How do we know how that's happening? So this is where it gets more important to be able to have this monitoring of the agreed behavior within a system. And these 4 and 5 are very much related to each other, the transparency and the feedback, because we also need a way to respond to that positive behavior or the harmful behaviors in the system. And if we have that, and we have this system connected, then even the way that the core design pattern number 2, the way that the value flows to and from people based on how they're contributing, how they're showing up. So the piece around transparency and having that clarity. I will pause to say that the way that this system works the best, again, it's not top down. It's more about just understanding how can we design systems or establish systems where these patterns are happening. But within within like a blockchain technology or some of these other spaces, that's where we're seeing some of the documentation and some of the anchoring of these aspects. So the piece about the 4, 5, and 6 really do kind of work together because depending on the nature of the sort of helpful or unhelpful behaviors, you end up with potentially a need for resolving a conflict between one or more people within a group. And so this is where the fast and fair conflict resolution, sometimes what we'll also call tension revelation, taking a positive and proactive approach to resolving conflict. And the spirit of this one, which actually is within sociocracy, there's not a prescriptive method. So any groups do need to establish the culture around how they address conflict. And one of the things that, in terms of a paradigm shifting approach, and what regenerative leadership is about as well, it's a different type of way that we want to come to resolution of a conflict. It's not through punitive measures and punishing or shaming people for the harms that they cause, and instead having this type of participatory and inclusive process where when people's behaviors are out of alignment with the culture that we've agreed to, then we want to have systems that help people improve their behavior. And also, this is why the reason that the graduated responding, when there's repeated behavior, then there might be a more a different method to try and support that. But in the essence of this transformational culture and regenerative cultural approach, the reason that it does draw from these indigenous communities as well, there's examples of in the indigenous worldview, when you are addressing conflict, the resolution of a conflict is a return to community. It's basically, someone is actually able to come back to the community, to the world community, or to the whole, and then a conflict is resolved. So it's less about punishment and more about wholeness, and figure out how to find that pathway. So number 6, that ability to address conflict, and it does, the fast and the fair piece, that is the goal. Being able to do things quickly, in the flow of life together, not harboring or holding on to grudges or resentments or things like that. So it ends up being an important piece about courageous communication or bold culture in that way. It's people speaking to the things that are there and the challenges. But this is an important one. And then, so moving to the core design pattern 7, which is about that authority to self-govern, meaning that at the circle level or at the domain level, people are governing of themselves. And this is specific to sociocracy in terms of the way circles work. So you can have sociocratic circles where that leadership is distributed and it's directed by the people who are doing the work at that level. And then those circles can be linked to one another, yet the actual ability to self-govern, to truly make decisions, does happen at that domain. So that's the pattern 7, where you can actually have distributed leadership. And the pattern number 8, which is really relevant in the space that we're working in with these global regeneration collaborations, and at the scale that we're at, is to have collaborative relations across the groups. And so if using these first 7 patterns or principles. So if people are able to have shared identity and purpose or alignment around the culture, and to embody the same agreements around how value can flow through the system, to be able to have a shared understanding of the ways that we can make decisions together or get input, especially how we can have a shared understanding of what's agreed and how it's manifested, and then how value flows in relation to it. We can have a very complex, but also in some ways elegant, or in certain expressions can be quite simple way to have value flow across the system and to resolve these patterns and to thrive through that. So I'll stop the screen share for a moment to, unless it's helpful to leave it up for some sharing, because I did want to open up and just see first if there's any questions, and then the next thing, you know, aside from questions, is just seeing, as I shared briefly at the beginning of this presentation, is just where do you find the edges that you're working on, you know, that you want to hone in on? Like, which of these patterns, you know, do you see most important, or where you might want to take some reflection on it or have some feedback too? So I'll stop the share. Any questions? Okay, good. We can look at the chat as well. Feel free to use the chat for, yeah. I see Alex's question. I like that. And I see, Gadi, I see your hand. So we can take the hand first, and then we'll come to that powerful question in the chat.
Okay, hi. So as I said to some of you in the beginning, I found myself leading a community of people interested in Israel. I'm from Israel, leading a community of people very interested to promote what is called regenerative agriculture. I'm an investor myself. I found myself into this. I'm not professional in anything. And we're going to have, after a year of building the community and building trust and some physical connections between people, we're about 140 people online. And we're going to have the first organizational gathering in a week, exactly. And the facilitators we've identified to help us move from community to organization are going to present sociocracy. So this presentation is very interesting for me. And my question is, first of all, so I know a few cases in Israel that they use sociocracy very, very well, but there are very different organizations to ours. So we are a very multidisciplinary organization. We have people from the government, we have farmers, we have investors, we have researchers, advisors, agronomists, media people, you name it. Whoever is interested could probably have a role in helping the whole ecosystem evolve in a good way. So that's my philosophy in a nutshell. And I wonder if you have some examples of such a complex community using sociocracy or anything else. For me, the trust building has become an issue as we grew exponentially, and we didn't have enough gatherings face to face, and it's just more people. I'm a bit worried now that we're trying to move into an organization mode without enough face-to-face meetings. So it took a lot of time, but hope this helps.
Great. Well, thank you for the question there. And yeah, I imagine that relates to a number of other people in different ways, wherever they are in the arc of creating a group or starting to create that coherence. I did just put the link to the Participatory Commons white paper, part 1 of that paper. If you do have the time and want to give a read over that, we do speak in there to the degree of complexity around trust and belonging, or trust and belonging as kind of a core pattern for initiating engagement. But then also there's a real elegance to the designs for membranes, which is the example of core pattern 1 there, or even pattern 7 around the domain. And so if you have a kind of a multi-stakeholder environment where you're describing, you have people in different levels of engagement, and it's not necessarily one organization, it may be many organizations. And this is where actually why we call it a commons, a participatory commons, because you can have many organizations interacting, and we need to. And we can't have one organization that overtakes the others. But sometimes we do want to spin up an initiative or a project, and then we want people to buy into it. We want people to say, yes, I'm going to support this, and they may be a stakeholder at the level of on the ground, someone that's working on these regenerative agriculture projects on the ground. They might be someone who's funding the regenerative agriculture project. So the way to create a culture that can have inclusive participation for everyone, that is an innovative design, and there is a sociocratic design for that, though it's not necessarily like a boilerplate sociocracy model. It is a little more complex, the system. So I would be open to sharing more about that, Gadi, if there's a good moment or it's helpful, especially as your group is working along, because it does get specific to the groups, but hopefully that paper as well would be a good resource on the participatory commons. Yeah. And I thought I would come back to Alex's question next around the, because it is a really significant one that can come up in terms of conflict resolution, sort of, is there like a gold standard, or is there a, like a best version? Again, this is, so for addressing conflict, the cultural part's very important. So, and this is another example too, where we're building or growing regenerative culture, right? So that's another part of what we're doing. If you're familiar with Daniel Christian Ball's work too, but designing regenerative cultures, building regenerative culture. So when we want to address conflict in a regenerative way, we don't have as many templates for it. In a lot of systems, we have punitive justice systems, right, where there's a law, there's a court of law, and you go in and you have, this is what happened, these are the details. And in some cases, you also have a lot of corruption, even in terms of, who gets heard or who gets listened to, or who has a better lawyer and things like that. So when we look at addressing conflict in a different pattern altogether, the reason that I brought up the indigenous model, where the purpose is a return to community, one of the standards that I would recommend, or that I think is valuable, is restorative circles, which is based on the work of, or it is the work of Dominic Barter. It has evolved a bit over more than 20 years, but it was developed in a context of creating restorative patterns amongst the people where the harm has happened. And so you're working with, there's a facilitation to the process, and you work with the people very specifically about what happened, and in particular, like kind of a first event. And there is a process around restorative, a restorative process that happens. There's the way I see it is a kind of a spectrum though too, because you can have conflict at a small level, where it's just like the sand, it's the sand in your shoe, or it's, it's the thing, it's just a smaller thing. And so the culture part, if you can resolve patterns earlier, and that's why I referenced an example called tension revelation. And the idea there is simply that we take a positive and proactive approach, and we just think there's some gift in the tension, there's some gift in the conflict, there's some gift in what's underlying it. And so if we're able to hold that mindset, because that's on the spectrum where it's, you can still see that. But when it gets bigger and you need more help, or you need a different support, or there's a more harm.
Wait, Alex, be good. You're being kicked out of your building.
Yeah. I need to leave. The building is going to close, so I will rewatch the recording.
Okay, that one.
For the answer. But I want to thank you
Okay.
for addressing my question. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Take care.
Good luck.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you. Take care.
Yeah.
I thought he was kicked out from his home.
Right. No, that would be a different level of, I mean, this is the other way to answer Alex's question, that I actually think is what I'm available for as a consultant as well, is the specific questions. In my permaculture education, there's a saying within permaculture, the answer to almost every question is it depends, because the question will drive for the answer, the more specific it is, right? But we also need to be able to, and so that's where it is. If the gold standard in addressing conflicts in a way does depend a lot on the certain situation. But I shared about restorative circles. I think that's a very good resource. Tension revelation. I'll just round that up, by saying that the essence within it is the positivity and a willingness to kind of own our part within a conflict. There within that space. It also allows for things that sometimes there's misunderstanding. There's mutual mutual patterns that are in that, and of course conflict arises at a whole spectrum, and so that's why I mentioned that spectrum aspect. The spectrum at which conflict can arise. See my old friend Joshua Albert coming in. Nice. All right, hello and welcome. So we've been just did a presentation on some of the pro-social and sociocracy patterns, and was inviting some questions. I don't know if anyone else has any questions or examples of some of those patterns that you're working on that you're finding any challenge.
How popular is this approach in different parts of the world, and what are typical organizations using it, or not typical?
Yeah, well, nice. Alex is able to join back from outside. Nice. That's a kind of an interesting question, because what I'm presenting isn't necessarily something that when I talk about pro-social and sociocracy, I mean, I think sociocracy is growing in the world. I would say it's definitely a bit of a buzz, but it depends on where you're looking in terms of domains. So I think in the intentional communities, eco-village movement, and the on-the-ground communities like that we're supporting with Rebuild in a lot of ways, I would say that sociocracy has a fairly positive uptake there. And the pro-social patterns, what I was referring to, again, while they're based on patterns of healthy commons management of indigenous communities, I do actually think that you can see these patterns embodied in healthy communities, whether or not they're aware of pro-social as a framework or a frame. And so that's an interesting piece in itself. But pro-social world, which I can also give note to, they're one of the groups that's at prosocial.world. That's one of the examples where you see a distributed expression.
Sorry, Keala. Joshua wants to say something. If it's you want to.
Yeah, I'll come to Joshua in just a moment. I want to finish just the second part of this answer, and then I'm excited to hear that. Yeah, I just wanted to land that piece around the participatory commons. Also to see, like, to answer how adopted it is. We do have several instances where there are communities, and again, that's beyond one organization. That's looking at at more of a bioregional scale. That's another space that you see this happening in Design School for Regeneration. Joe Brewer's work looking at the expansion of that work around bioregional regeneration. So you see some of these patterns in that scale too. So yeah, Joshua, though, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I missed the beginning, but just jumping in and hearing, sounds like you're just kind of offering some discussion around sociocracy, and I was just going to share, like, that was the process and the organizational model that we used for a 2-year prototype eco-village project. There was 11 of us that got trained in it for that project, and it was a really great experience. And the patterns, I would say, like, I would just reflect on, all of us were new to it. So it was like a process to get 11 people learning a new, decision-making process, organizational tool. And there was like a little bit of frustration at the beginning, along with a lot of fun, but like it was a little bit slower at the beginning because it was a new thing that everybody was learning. And then another little piece I'd add in, recently, there's a new co-housing community starting outside of San Diego here, and I've been helping with some of the project management. So I've been tuning into like the commons, a lot of different like co-housing groups the last couple of weeks, and noticing that sociocracy is coming up a ton in the co-housing discussions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good example as well. And there's a community weavers effort that's happening now in across several organizations, and it's a bit of a participatory commons instant in itself. Hopefully to see that growing, but the co-housing and sociocracy for all, which is one of the global organizations that does a lot of sociocracy education. But we see the Foundation of Intentional Communities, which is another intentional communities group, and then the Global Eco-Village Network weaving as well. So the basics of that, again, it's just, it's following the energy in a way, and just seeing that there is a lot of success in these patterns. And co-housing models themselves are another one that is a growing option that we're excited to see more of that pattern. And I think that for these regenerative village projects and these building initiatives, rebuilding community in this way, it's a really great pattern. Of course, there are zoning hurdles and different things like that, depending on where we are to work with. And I would say that, you know, because our topic today being regenerative leadership, and, you know, speaking in these terms, this is also about being leaders in this new culture and this new way of doing things. So we become ambassadors for, and we need to be patient, you know, when we're bringing the regenerative approaches, you know, into systems that have kind of an established way of doing things that is the kind of tried and true or the expected. And I wanted to bring in one piece from Carol Stanford around this in terms of regenerative approaches. And because when we think about the core patterns in our ways of doing things, when we want to think about having a regenerative approach, sometimes it's counterintuitive when we think about something like leadership, which could seem like, oh, well, how do we take control or, you know, really like, you know, get this thing going in a certain way. And there's actually some beautiful patterns from Carol Stanford's work around just basically knowing that we can sometimes do it in a more resilient or a softer way, more of a yin way. So if we are wanting to help cause a culture shift, then we don't necessarily want to make a direct confrontation with the pattern that we want to see change. There's ways to interact with it, you know, indirectly and in a more subtle way, which can actually, in some cases, will cause more of a transition or a shift. And it's another aspect of addressing conflict through creating more understanding. Because I mentioned earlier about restorative circles, the phases in that really are about mutual comprehension is the first phase. It's basically having a shared understanding of what happened. And so if we want to create change, this is kind of a basis for it, more shared understanding. So I'm kind of moving around on topics, but I do want to check just to see if there was anyone else that had any of the patterns that they feel like the ones that they want to work with. I'll put the slide back up again just for, especially too, because, you know, Joshua, I know you came a little later, though I know you're also familiar with these. But the invitation is, you know, just considering like in your own approaches to regenerative leadership or your own projects, you know, the things that you're working on, what are the areas here where you find, you know, the most need for support or the most need for insight? Maybe we can use our collective intelligence here to sense into some of that.
I have a question, but if nobody else wants to keep in.
Yeah, go ahead, Gadi.
So the last one about working with other collaborative relations with other groups. In our situation, I kind of heard about regenerative agriculture from investors community I'm with. And there is another woman here that brought the idea from somewhere else, and we started working in parallel. So now we have kind of very conflicting approaches. So I'm the masculine supposed to be, but I'm the feminine in this game. And she's very centralist. She has an NGO, which is all about she taking all the decisions, all the board are people who are not understanding agriculture, don't know anybody in the field, they just support her. And she's amazing. I mean, she's beautiful and she's doing a lot of good things. It's just the approach is so different. And I don't know if you've encountered a situation like that where and she's very strong woman. I'm not. I'm very sensitive. So I break if there's too much tension. I just cannot hold it. And she's not. She's like a horse. She's, whoa, like that. What do you do?
Thank you.
If there is any.
Yeah, I feel like that's a great question. And I think it probably almost everyone can relate to it in one way or another, you know, in that. And I think the essence here, you know, when you look at that, the relations with other groups and the principles, it has to do in a way with the principal understanding or the shared understanding. So in a place like going back to number one around the shared identity and purpose. So if you are able to establish that whatever level of shared purpose that you have at that level with this woman or the project that she's working in, and then if you can really establish that type of a agreement, the explicit understanding of how you're coming together, and that might even be, to be able to actually have a container where you would be able to share maybe a preference that you have around how to work together, or letting her know about your sensitivity, or having some of that transparency there, speaking around the transparency piece. Otherwise, it's true that sometimes when you check for that purpose alignment, when you're looking at who am I going to collaborate with, you're looking across the group, so the other people in the space that you're in, and you want to see, okay, do we have shared purpose, or can we draw a circle that's bigger? Maybe you have to draw a bigger circle that includes both of you, because there's a different culture there, or there's a different style. But essentially, you just want to be able to know that there's enough shared values and shared purpose alignment that you can basically have that trust, and that you at least have also some of these other agreements in place, around things. And that sounds like it can be a complex situation, though, Gadi, I imagine too, it's an opportunity for growth, for yourself, and also for her, and for the others involved. So if we're also able to create that shared domain that you're entering into, that shared circle, that shared space, then you can create that clear agreement. So I think it's possible, but it certainly sounds like it could be a room for growth, a little bit of a challenge. Hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. It is a challenge. It's not solving, but it gives me some perspective. I'm not alone there, and I'll go through it. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions or challenges, places where you see these patterns? Joshua.
How deep did you guys go into restorative circles? I don't want to ask if you guys already kind of really covered that, but I have some curiosity around that.
Yeah, we could go for that a little more. It was one of the questions in the chat from Alex, particularly just asking if there was kind of a standard for conflict resolution, kind of a gold standard. And I was sharing that, there really, isn't necessarily, because it is cultural, though the context for restorative circles, I think, is a really valid and valuable one. And I didn't give much of an overview on it, so I could share a little bit more on that, and then maybe Joshua will see where that brings us. But the specifics are particularly that there's a facilitation process of that. So the restorative circle does have a facilitator that's leading the process. And then they do a process of getting in touch with and connecting with the people who were impacted, essentially the people who are calling for the circle. And there's a fair amount of pre-circling, meetings that happen in smaller groups before you come to the restorative circle itself, which also helps to bring more awareness and relieve some of it brings more awareness and relieves some of the tension, but it also helps to get more specific. What happened? What is the thing that needs to be transformed? What is the thing that needs to be resolved? Then there are three parts to the actual restorative circle itself, which is that mutual comprehension phase, where there's a sharing and a sharing back, some reflection amongst, within that circle. And the circle is composed of the person who is calling for the circle, the person who did the harm, or the person or people that are implied in that, and then the impacted community, which is anyone else that it feels important to have at the circle to witness. And so it doesn't need to be everyone, but the idea that there's representation. And there are ways to include people as to have people stand in if the person's not available, for the circle. But so you have this mutual comprehension phase, which is really about understanding each other. And then you have a self-responsibility phase. And these can start to come together a little bit too, when you have someone is basically bringing in, taking responsibility for their own role in what has happened. Usually there's self-responsibility happening amongst everyone, in the space, depending on the type of conflict. And then there's the third phase, which is about the agreed upon actions. So once there's been a shared understanding of what happened and some responsibility being taken, the natural next step of an agreed upon actions. So in some cases, that's a pathway to make amends for the harm that was caused. You know, and then in other cases, it would be, you know, just an agreed upon way of behaving in the future, ways of interacting, or to tie it very specifically to this, to the patterns within prosocial, there might be more, you know, like a new understanding around the feedback now, and a new understanding of behavior that would change. So like a new commitment to behavior might happen, and whether that's again, this is in my general terms, you know, it depends on the specifics. So it can be useful to talk about, you know, specific examples. And in the process of training in restorative circles, which I did over a several year process myself, aside from doing like an immersive training of, you know, maybe a long weekend, which you know, a 4-day training, but also then to be able to have practice groups where you can use, as a facilitator, you can bring the examples from your world and work with other facilitators and other people who are passionate about this kind of restorative process, so that you can get some practice at it, because it does require the buy-in, you know, the choice, the willingness. But like I said, you can still do it even if people aren't willing to show up. You know, you can still have a restorative circle in this way, and that's probably a pretty good overview. But if you have any specifics, we could dial in a little closer if you want.
Keala, what are some good resources you recommend, like websites or templates to learn a little bit more and educate ourselves about restorative circles?
I think that and we could double check, I think restorativecircles.org is their kind of main site.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's and I have, since you can, I'll put my email in the chat too, and I can share, I have a PDF that is pretty useful as a bit of an overview, and I'm preparing to to provide more coaching around it and resources too. So if ever that's a need, it is one of my hats that I'm taking up again lately, of realizing like the need for it, and and how important the practice is. And it would be really great, in fact, you know, that's one of the things, to do a restorative circle facilitation training, you know, in the context of our regenerative villages and our regenerative communities, so that as we're sharing here, like when we have shared tools or resources or shared methods, then we grow that ability to have that relationship with other groups, and we can use the same patterns, the same tools, whether that's for how we reward each other and share value with you know, economic flows or regenerative flows, and also with just having shared tools like these, so that they support our regenerative culture. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for expanding on that, Keala.
Yeah, pleasure. Yeah, I know we probably have time for you know, for maybe one more, if people have a question or one of the patterns here that is the trickiest for your group, or you know, one that maybe also, I know there's probably different language speakers, so if any of this language doesn't seem clear, I'm also really open to clarifying if anybody has that kind of question.
Keala, we have 10 more minutes if someone wants a question or anything else.
Yeah, I'll come back to the main room view.
Yeah.
I know some folks joined a little later. But definitely, you know, in terms of sharing my contact info in the chat, because if there's any further question or things that people want to learn more about, there's definitely space for more, another question if people have it.
I can always ask things, but I'll wait and see if anybody else has anything.
I'm trying to, hello guys. I'm trying to think about my question, because I'm not English speaker, but I am working in a project as a consulting with a group, And at this project, the leader is trying to build the governance based on sociocracy, but like she's the only one really connected with the project. She's building this project within a community, but the other people involved is not like formally part of that. So how to try to create this kind of governance in a very small teams? Did you understand?
Yes, yes. And actually, yeah, I think that's one of the patterns that can be, if I understand correctly, and you can let me know too, but it sounds like the size of the group and the amount of information that people have about how to do it, the sociocracy, so the size of the group, but also maybe the amount of information. So one thing to resolve for there is kind of what I was sharing earlier, maybe before you arrived, but that sociocracy as a pattern, it can be applied in slightly different ways, or even in significantly different ways. You know, if you don't have enough people to do a double linking, you know, between these circles, you know, that's fine. And you just work with, you know, the transparency within the system, you know, and then if I might have been hearing with my own challenge in mind, because one of the things that I find is whether people have learned the system, whether they've kind of agreed to do it or they're really bought into it, that can be one of the challenges of whether people really understand it or whether they've really learned. So that's where I think having resources to help people and to keep it sort of playful or fun to learn and to have it be empowering. So Sociocracy for All has developed, they're some of the more robust in having many languages version for the resources, but also oriented towards children. So they have Sociocracy for children to help children learn sociocracy, which I think is really beautiful, because then, you know, the earlier that we could adopt this type of inclusive decision making, and also, you know, allowing for it to be to make sense at that level. But the piece that I think is important, is having chances for the learning to happen that are appropriate for when people how they can show up. So if it's helpful, feel free to email me for a more specific, you know, we could have a one-on-one to see if I could help with your specific example, because it really does get nuanced. Yeah. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
I see a question in the chat around the apps. Now, this is a really interesting piece because the combination of a digital expression of sociocracy, I think we're still in the beginning of that. There's a platform called Nestor. I think that's the right URL for Nestor. This one allows for the creation of the circles and the clarity of what the domains are, you know, just the mandate, like the purpose, so that you can have really clear purpose at the circle level, and you can have clear what the accountabilities are, and you communicate tensions in this platform, and you can do governance there. So Nestor is one space where that's happening, and there are some other tools like Lumio, which does allow for integrative consent decision making, you know, which is the sociocratic approach where you integrate other ideas into a proposal, you shape the proposal more fully based on the feedback until you get the consent of all the people that are concerned at that level. So I think it's one of the things where there's a pretty strong difference between doing that decision together in a circle in the same room, you know, compared to working on these proposals across time and space, which we need to do. We need to be able to do that, right? Clearly in our age, even with an on the ground community, you still need that. So in my own example of the community that I'm a co-founder of here, we are working with Lumio and our in-person decision making to try and streamline the processes of proposals sociocratically. And it's certainly a learning curve.
What do you think of last?
Right. And Go for it.
Oh, I was just curious if you have any experience with Glass Frog. I think it's more holacracy based. I've just heard a bit about it. I've never used it.
Yeah, Glass Frog is one, and that is based from holacracy. There are actually a couple other ones too. So yeah, I kind of just I can't speak to Glass Frog as much. The main thing I wanted to speak to about using technical tools is that you still need to make sure that you're making room for the relationality between the people involved. And the tools can often lend us a little bit more towards the cultural patterns of power dynamics that can happen where there's explicit or implicit power, at play within different decisions. But this is a whole other domain around regenerative leadership, and I know we're going to be rounding up this session. So I'm really excited to have had a chance to present again here, and definitely would love to stay in touch with folks who are here. And if there's any other, I think we'll be weaving forward. Certainly, Shala and I will be doing an on-the-ground event here, which I believe the link has been shared. We are in North America on the West Coast here, so many of you, it would be probably quite a trip to get here. Joshua's probably closest nearby, but I'll share the info just to put that out there. And again, it's been a real pleasure to join you with this, and many props and gratitude to the Rebuild team for pulling this together.
Thank you, Keala, for your session, for your sharings, and thank you for your contribution, the rest of you, with your questions. And we have to finish this session now to give space to the next one. So if you have anything else to ask really quickly, please. Or Keala, you can close.
Thank you, Keala. Thank you.
Keala. Great to see
We'll be in
everyone.
touch.
Thank you, Keala.
Thank you.
Bye.